Ghost Story by Abracad. He lay there in the darkness, paralyzed with fear. He could hear the footsteps getting closer, knowing they were carrying something evil. He tried to move, to defend himself or make his escape. But his muscles wouldn't respond. He tried to shout in desperation, but even his lungs wouldn't oblige. The footsteps had ceased now. The door handle creaked as it turned. The door slowly opened. He saw the glint of the blade in the moonlight, and finally he yelled out. His mother woke him. He was covered in sweat. His heart was pounding like it was about to explode. "I must have been having that dream again," he said. "That's the second time this week. Why don't you see someone about it?" his mother suggested. He flatly refused to see a shrink. They sat in silence for a while. "Let's talk about it in the morning," she said as she left the room. Martin didn't sleep any more that night. Was he really going mad? He had had bad dreams since he was a child, but they had left him alone for a while now. Since his divorce, they returned, worse than ever. And always the same. He tried to remember it logically. It doesn't start as a nightmare. He's at a party, music playing, and people talking. He can see their faces, but no one he recognizes. But within the horror begins. He's in a bed in a room that's not his own. And the footsteps... And then he can't remember anymore. "Why don't you take a holiday?" suggested his mother at breakfast. "What with the divorce and Jean getting the house and the kids and all that overtime you've been working, it's no wonder your brain's getting a bit mixed up." Perhaps she was right. "Can't you look at some of your old friends and see if they got some time off?" "No, Mother. They're still happily married," he snapped. "I'll go away on my own for a bit. Give me time to think about the future. Might even take up photography again." She was a bit worried about him being alone in his present state, but at least he'd agreed to take a holiday. When he got in from work that night, it was all arranged. He booked the time off and was going to drive down to Cornwall. It was somewhere he had always wanted to go, but never found the time. The 2 weeks before he left passed without him having the dream again, as though anticipation of the holiday were enough to calm his mind. He set off on Sunday, feeling more relaxed than he had done in ages. Most of the first day was spent on the road, arriving in Cornwall just in time to find a room for the night. He decided to make the most of his visit, taking in as much as he could and staying somewhere different each night. After a second night's sleep and a hearty breakfast, he headed towards the coast, camera gear in tow. A full day later, he found that night's lodges, and so went the next 3 days. On Thursday, he arrived in the picture square village of Barnaby, just before sundown. He entered the Coach House Motel and made arrangements for the night. He had a strange feeling he had been there before. After dinner, he got to talking to the landlord in the bar. The feeling of recognition now stronger than ever. He remarked that he had appeared to be the only guest, and the landlord informed him there was just one other guest, but she spent most of her time in her room. "Are you a photographer?" inquired the landlord. "No, nothing too exciting," replied Martin. "I'm just pursuing an old hobby." "You must visit the old abbey while you're down this way," suggested the landlord. "They say it's haunted." "If you believe in that kind of thing," said Martin skeptically. The landlord hesitated for a while, and then he said, "I hope you're not superstitious, but they say this place is haunted." "Tell me more," said Martin curiously. "Well, about 200 years ago, there was a boy who used to help out here. Anyway, he started getting too familiar with the owner's daughter. The owner didn't want servants married into his family, so he murdered the boy and hid the body in the cellar. Eventually, the villagers got suspicious and burst into the place. When they found the boy's body, they carried out their own death sentence on his killer. It was shortly after that my ancestors took this place over, and it's been in the family ever since." "So who's the ghost?" asked Martin. "The boy or the innkeeper?" "Well, it's supposed to be the innkeeper, destined to remain on earth for the rest to pay for his sins. It's quite a well-known tale in ghost hunting circles. In fact, they used to run tours here for people interested in that kind of thing." "Have you ever seen anything?" asked Martin. "Not exactly," said the landlord thoughtfully, "but I've often felt a presence like you're not alone. But I've had 3 or 4 staff leave over what they claim to have seen." "Evening, Alice," he said as a smartly dressed old woman entered the lounge. The woman said good evening to Martin. He didn't answer at first. He was trying to remember where he had seen her before. The woman took her drink back upstairs. Martin decided to retire to his room. He wanted to make an early start the next day. He still had a vague feeling he'd lived through all of this before, but he couldn't remember, and right at that moment he didn't care. He lay back in the bed feeling more relaxed than he had done in ages. It was as though this part of the world had been made for him. He made plans to quit his job and get a place here. He soon drifted into a deep sleep of satisfaction. Something woke him suddenly, and then he remembered. This place and these people were from his dream. He could hear the footsteps getting closer. Knowing they were carrying something evil, he tried to move, to defend himself or make his escape, but his muscles wouldn't respond. He tried to shout in desperation, but even his lungs wouldn't oblige. The footsteps had ceased now. The door handle creaked as it turned. The door slowly opened. He saw the glint of the blade in the moonlight. But this time it was for real. The figure drew closer. Still he couldn't move. His face hidden in the darkness. The face hidden in the darkness hovered over him. The blade was poised to strike, and then he overcame the paralysis of fear. He grabbed the arm of his unknown adversary, and he felt the knife go in deeply. The strength suddenly drained from his enemy. The figure collapsed in a heap. Taylor felt a great force pushing him into the bed, so hard he could barely breathe. The whining sound in his head felt as though it would burst his brain, and then he sank into oblivion. The clock said 8:05 when he woke. The sun was streaming through the window, and it looked like another beautiful fine day. He remembered the dream, but far from being concerned, he felt confident he wouldn't have those dreams again. Looking forward to breakfast, he dressed, shaved, and went downstairs. To his surprise, the place was deserted. He shouted and searched, but no available. He went outside. The main street was empty, but he noticed the news agent's was open. He went in and inquired if the owner knew where the landlord of the hotel had gone. "Potential buyer, are you, sir?" asked the man behind the counter. Taylor explained that he had stayed the night and wanted to settle up before he moved on. The man looked puzzled and explained the hotel had been boarded up for about 4 years after the owner had murdered his wife and killed himself. "You see, sir, at one time we used to get a lot of visitors around here, but these days people prefer to go abroad. Old Tom couldn't bear to see the business go downhill. He had been there since he was a boy. I suppose he couldn't face it and just cracked. He stabbed his wife Alice while she was sleeping and hanged himself in the lounge." When Taylor wouldn't accept the shopkeeper's explanation, a news agent left the shop, and the two men walked across the road together. The hotel was indeed boarded up. "It's been like that since it happened, sir. Nobody wanted to go near it, but now they've just put it back on the market. That's why I thought you were asking." Taylor was confused. Then he wondered what had happened to his bags. At least his car keys and money were in his pocket. He went over to his car, and there in the boot were his belongings.